My name is Emily Carter, and until the summer I turned 24, I thought I knew everything worth knowing about my family. We were the sort of people who never missed Sunday brunch, who sent holiday cards in neat, matching sweaters, who smiled in photographs like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. I grew up in a modest white house on the edge of Savannah, Georgia, where the air in late July clung to your skin like a secret. My mom, Susan Carter, was the sort of woman other mothers admired, organized, gracious, the first to bake cookies for a fundraiser or drop off a casserole when someone was sick. She was the glue that held our small family together. My dad, Daniel, had passed away when I was 15 after a brief illness that no one liked to discuss. My memories of him had blurred over time. A tall man with a gentle voice, the smell of pipe tobacco, his laugh that warmed every corner of the house. After he was gone, Mom became even more perfect. She never faltered, never raised her voice. She kept going as if the loss hadn't hollowed her out the way it had me. Most days, I told myself she was stronger than I'd ever be. I worked at a small bookstore downtown, a place called Harbor Books, where I spent hours cataloging shipments and listening to the rain tap against the windows. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was steady, familiar, and it let me be near the stories that made me feel less alone. Sometimes, when the shop was quiet, I'd imagine my life as a novel. The girl who couldn't let go of the past, waiting for a plot twist that might never come. I still lived at home. Part of me knew it was time to leave, to claim some independence, but every time I imagined packing up my things, a tightness squeezed my chest. My mother always said there was no rush. "You have your whole life to be on your own," she'd say, brushing the hair from my forehead like she used to when I was little. "Stay as long as you need." It was comforting, but also suffocating. Lately, I'd started noticing little things I hadn't before. The way Mom sometimes drifted into thought when she thought no one was looking, her hands clasped tight in her lap. How she'd retreat to her bedroom after dinner, the door closing with a soft click, as if she were shutting out more than the hallway behind her. Once, I'd caught her wiping at her eyes before she turned to smile at me. I told myself it was nothing, just memories of Dad, maybe, or the weight of holding everything together for so long. But one evening in early August, something happened that I couldn't explain away. It was a Thursday, and the summer heat had finally started to break. I'd just come home from the bookstore, arms full of unsold copies of an old memoir the owner said I could keep. Mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of marinara sauce. The radio played softly, a station she always tuned in to when she cooked. When she saw me, she turned the volume down. "How was work?" she asked, her voice bright. I shrugged, setting the books on the counter.
"Slow.
"I swear nobody reads anymore." She smiled, but her eyes didn't quite match her mouth. I thought about asking her what was wrong, but the moment passed as she ladled sauce into a bowl. Later that night, after she went to bed, I stayed up in the living room, reading one of the battered memoirs by lamplight. Around midnight, I heard a noise, like something falling in her room. I stood in the hallway listening. Silence. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something deeper, a suspicion that had been building without my realizing it. I stepped closer to her door, hand hovering over the knob. I didn't open it, I wasn't that brave yet. Instead, I pressed my ear against the wood. I heard her voice, hushed and shaking. "No," she whispered. "I can't. She can't ever know." My heart thudded, so hard it hurt. She was talking to someone on the phone. Or to herself. I didn't know which was worse. I backed away, careful not to make a sound. For the next week, I tried to pretend I hadn't heard it. But everything looked different. The house felt like a stage set, too neat, too curated. I started replaying all the moments that didn't make sense. The closed doors, the secret tears, the letters she burned in the fireplace one winter night when she thought I was asleep. And the drawer in her desk, always locked. I'd asked her about it once, years ago. She'd said it was just old paperwork. But now, when I walked past her room, I could almost hear it calling to me. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that there was no secret big enough to destroy the life we'd built together. But the feeling wouldn't leave me alone. Something was waiting. I just didn't know yet how much it would change me. The Saturday after that night, I woke up before dawn, the uneasy feeling still stuck to my skin. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles, my thoughts chasing themselves in loops. I knew I couldn't ignore the voice I'd heard through her door anymore. Mom had gone to the farmer's market early, she always did on Saturdays, so the house was quiet. Sunlight seeped in through the curtains as I padded down the hall to her room. My heart thumped, loud and insistent. I stood in front of her desk for a long time. The locked drawer looked exactly the same as it always had, but now it felt alive, charged with the possibility that everything I thought I knew was a lie. I tugged at the handle, even though I already knew it wouldn't budge. I'd seen Mom slide the small brass key into her jewelry box once when I was 16. Back then, I hadn't cared enough to wonder why. Now, it felt like that key was the only thing standing between me and the truth. I opened her jewelry box with trembling hands. It took me a minute to find it, a tiny key tucked under a velvet pouch of old brooches. My pulse roared in my ears as I slid it into the lock. When the drawer clicked open, I felt something shift inside me, as though I'd crossed an invisible line. Inside was a leather-bound book, cracked along the spine. I lifted it out carefully, almost reverently. It was heavier than I expected. The cover had no title, no markings, just the worn texture of something that had been touched 1,000 times. I knew, without opening it, that it was my mother's diary. I thought about putting it back, about pretending I hadn't seen it, but I couldn't. I needed to know. I sank down on the edge of the bed and flipped it open. The first entry was dated April 3rd, 1998, the year before I was born. I never thought I would have to write this down, but if I don't, I think it might swallow me whole. I swallowed hard. My mother's handwriting looked fragile, almost afraid. The next few pages described her early marriage to my father, how they'd struggled with money, how she'd felt lonely and trapped in a town she hadn't chosen. But then, the tone shifted. I tried to love Daniel as much as I could, but my heart belonged to someone else. Someone I thought I'd never see again. I read the sentence over and over until the words blurred. Someone else? I turned the page, desperate for more. There were entries about a man she'd met years before my father, a man named Michael. He was her first love, she wrote, the person she'd dreamed about long after they parted ways. I read about secret letters, about phone calls she'd never told anyone about. The night before my wedding, he called me. He said he was leaving everything behind for me. I told him it was too late. But sometimes, I think about what would have happened if I'd said yes. My chest tightened. Was this what she meant when she'd whispered she can't ever know? I kept reading, page after page. One entry stopped me cold. I've always wondered if Emily is really Daniel's. If she is Michael's instead. The dates line up. I never had the courage to find out. The book slid from my hands and landed on the floor with a dull thud. I pressed both palms to my face. My breath came in ragged gasps. How could she keep something like this from me? From everyone? I wanted to slam the drawer shut and never think about it again. But part of me needed to know the rest. I picked the diary up and flipped to the most recent entries. They were shorter, more erratic, as if she'd written them late at night, half asleep or half mad with guilt. I have to tell her soon. She deserves to know. But every time I try, I see her face and I can't do it. Michael called again last week. He says he wants to meet her. God help me, I don't know what to do. I felt my throat close up. Michael was alive.
He knew about me.
1,000 questions surged up all at once. Did Dad ever suspect? Did my grandparents know? Was I about to lose the only family I'd ever had? The front door opened, and I jumped, slamming the drawer shut. Emily. Mom called from the kitchen. I shoved the diary under the bed and tried to calm my breathing. Up here. I called back, trying to sound normal. She came into the room carrying a paper bag full of tomatoes and peaches. Her eyes flicked to the drawer, and for a split second, I saw it. Panic. Did you need something? She asked carefully. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I was just looking for stamps. I lied. I wanted to mail something. Her gaze lingered on me. I could tell she didn't believe me. Not entirely. But she only nodded. There in the kitchen drawer. I mumbled thanks and brushed past her, feeling like my skin was on fire. All day, I replayed the diary in my mind, each word a fresh wound. That night, when I lay in bed, I knew I had a choice: pretend none of this had happened or keep reading until I had the whole truth. In the darkness, my decision felt inevitable. Whatever was waiting in those pages, I had to know. I just didn't realize that by digging deeper, I'd set off a chain of events I couldn't control. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, watching the faint patterns of headlights move across my ceiling. My mind repeated the same line like a warning bell. I've always wondered if Emily is really Daniel's. The words had burrowed under my skin, deeper than I thought words ever could. By sunrise, I made a decision. I couldn't pretend anymore. I needed answers, not maybes, not riddles hidden in ink. The diary had cracked open my world, and now I needed to tear it wide apart. I waited until Mom left for her Sunday yoga class. She always wore a lavender sweatshirt and left exactly at 9 a.m. I heard the garage door close, and 15 seconds later, I was in her room, crawling under the bed for the diary. I flipped to the entry dated just 2 weeks ago. I saw Michael again. He's changed. Grayer, quieter. But when he looked at me, I felt 16 again. He said he wants to see Emily. He believes she's his. I told him no. I told him it was too late. But is it? So he really was nearby. Not a ghost from a far-off state, but here in Savannah. Close enough to meet. I went back to the earlier entries. In one, she'd mentioned where they used to meet in secret, Palmer Park, near the Rose Garden. I hadn't been there in years. I remember going with her when I was little. She used to hold my hand and tell me fairy tales about women who lived in the woods and never aged. Now I wondered if those stories were just distractions, moments created to cover the silence in her chest. That afternoon, I drove to the park. I sat on a bench across from the Rose Garden, gripping the diary in my bag like it was a ticking bomb. And then, God, I still remember how it felt. I saw him. A man, late 50s maybe, tall, salt and pepper hair, wearing a weathered brown jacket in the middle of a summer day. He walked slowly, like someone carrying weight in his soul. He paused beside the rose bushes. And he looked just like me. It was a gut punch. His eyes, the shape of his jaw, reflections I'd never seen in my father. But in him, it was all there. I don't know how long I stared. Finally, I stood and walked over. Michael, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned, startled. Yes, I'm Emily. The silence that followed could have cracked the world in half. He blinked, lips parting. You're Susan's daughter? I nodded. He took a slow breath, like he'd been preparing for this moment for years. I thought she wouldn't tell you. She didn't, I said, pulling the diary from my bag. This did. He sat down hard on the bench, rubbing his hands together. I've waited a long time to meet you. For the next half hour, he told me everything. His love for my mom, how they had tried to stay apart after she married my dad, how they'd failed. He said he never knew if I was his daughter, but that he'd always hoped. She was scared, he said quietly. And maybe she was right to be. But I never stopped thinking about you. About what could have been. When I got home, Mom was in the kitchen. She was chopping carrots, but her hands stilled when she saw me. You went through the drawer. It wasn't a question. I met him, I said. She dropped the knife. The look on her face, shock, fear, regret, was unlike anything I'd ever seen. How much did you read? She whispered. Enough. Tears welled up in her eyes. I wanted to tell you. So many times. But I couldn't bear the thought of you hating me. I don't hate you, I said, though my voice shook. But I need to know the truth. She led me into the living room. We sat in silence before she finally spoke. I loved your father, she began, but Michael was the one I never let go of. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know whose child you were. I told myself it didn't matter. Daniel wanted a family so badly, and Michael was already gone. Why didn't you get a DNA test? I asked. Because I was afraid, she said. Afraid of what it would mean. Afraid I'd tear everything apart. It already is, I said softly. The next few days blurred together. I avoided both of them. I needed space, but space didn't quiet the questions pounding in my head. Eventually, I made another decision. I scheduled a DNA test. Neither Mom nor Michael argued. In fact, they both seemed relieved, like someone else was finally taking the wheel of this runaway car. Waiting for the results was torture. I kept thinking about what it would mean if Michael was my biological father. How would that change who I was? Would Dad still be my real father in the ways that mattered? Or would my entire identity shift like sand under my feet? One night, I sat with an old photo album in my lap, staring at pictures of my childhood. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, a camping trip with Dad in the mountains. I didn't remember biology in those moments. I remembered love. But still, I needed the truth. I needed clarity. And part of me feared the answer even more than the question. The morning the DNA results arrived, the sky was gray and heavy with a threat of rain. I'd been awake since 4, pacing the kitchen in my pajamas, a cup of coffee cooling untouched on the table. Mom hovered in the doorway, her hands twisting in the hem of her cardigan. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, like the past weeks had drained the color from her skin. I can open it if you want, she offered softly. I shook my head. No. I need to do it. The envelope sat between us like a live wire. Part of me wanted to set it on fire, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But the other part, the part that needed to understand who I really was, kept my hand steady. I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the single sheet of paper. My eyes darted to the bold black letters that spelled everything out in clinical, detached language. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. I felt the world tilt. Michael was my biological father. I looked up at Mom. She covered her mouth with one trembling hand, her eyes glassy, with unshed tears. I'm so sorry, she whispered, voice breaking. I thought I was protecting you. I thought it wouldn't matter in the end. It matters, I said, my throat raw. But not the way you think. She took a step closer. I never meant to take anything from you. I swear to you, Emily, I loved your father. He raised you like you were his own, because to him, you were. He would have loved you the same no matter what. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her. But I couldn't deny the hollow ache spreading through my chest. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? I asked. Her shoulders sagged. Because I didn't want you to feel like you didn't belong. You were our little girl. You were his pride. I thought if I pretended hard enough, it would be true. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, willing the tears to stop. But they came anyway, hot and relentless. Michael arrived a little after noon. He must have sensed that the results were in. When he stepped inside, he looked at me first, searching my face for something. Acceptance, rejection, forgiveness. I know this isn't simple, he said. But I want you to know I'm here, if you ever want to know me. I studied him, my biological father, the man whose blood ran in my veins. He was a stranger, and somehow familiar all at once. I thought of all the years I'd believed my story was simple, and how suddenly it had split into something jagged and complicated. I don't know what I want, I admitted. He nodded. That's okay. The rain started then, tapping the windows like the universe wanted to be heard. We stood there in the living room, the three of us bound together by old secrets and new truths. It was Mom who broke the silence. I have something else, she said. Her voice was small, like she was bracing for another earthquake. She walked to her bedroom and came back with a second leather-bound book. I kept 2 diaries, she confessed. One I wrote for myself and one I wrote for you, in case I ever got the courage to give it to you. I reached for it, my hands unsteady. When I opened the first page, I saw my name written in her delicate script. Emily, if you're reading this, then you know the truth. Please understand that none of this was ever about not loving you. It was about loving you too much to risk losing you. My heart cracked wide open. I sank into a chair, the book in my lap. Mom sat across from me, her face wet with tears she wasn't bothering to wipe away. "Will you ever forgive me?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I want to try." Michael stood awkwardly to the side, his hands shoved in his pockets. "I'm not here to take anything away from you," he said carefully. I've thought about you every day for 24 years. A surge of emotion rushed up in my chest, grief, confusion, longing. "I need time," I said. "Of course," he murmured. We all sat there, the air dense with everything that had been unsaid for decades. But the moment didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a doorway. Later that afternoon, I took both diaries up to my room. I read them until my eyes blurred, and my heart felt scraped raw. I learned things about my parents I'd never imagined. How close my mom had come to leaving, how she decided to stay because she couldn't bear the thought of shattering my father's life, how she'd convinced herself it was better for everyone to pretend. There was a passage that stopped me cold. "Sometimes I think the only way I survived was by lying to myself. But you can only pretend for so long before the truth demands to be heard." I closed the book and pressed it to my chest. That night, lying in bed, I thought about my father, the man who'd raised me, the man whose laugh I still remembered in my bones. No DNA test could erase what he'd meant to me. But the truth was out now, and there was no putting it back in the box. And as terrifying as that was, there was something freeing about it too. I'd spent so long feeling like I was waiting for my real life to start. Maybe this was it. In the days that followed, the house felt both more familiar and more foreign than ever. Every picture frame on the wall, every creak of the floorboards seemed touched by the knowledge I now carried. I thought the revelation would destroy me, that learning the truth would hollow me out until there was nothing left. But it didn't. Instead, it peeled away the illusions I'd mistaken for certainty and left me with something rawer, yes, but also more honest. On Wednesday, Mom knocked on my bedroom door while I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting through old photos. I almost told her to go away, but I couldn't. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded. She sat down across from me, her eyes red from crying. She looked tired in a way I'd never seen, like she'd been carrying too many years on her shoulders, and she was finally feeling every one. "I know there's nothing I can say that will make this better," she began, her voice hoarse. "But I need you to hear this. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." I swallowed. My throat felt like sandpaper. "I believe you," I said. And I did. But believing her didn't erase the hurt. She reached across the space between us and picked up one of the photos, me at age 4, grinning in a frilly dress at my birthday party. My dad, Daniel, stood behind me with his hands on my shoulders. "You were everything to him," she whispered. "He knew how hard it was for me to stay sometimes, but he never doubted that you were his daughter. Not once." Tears slipped down my cheeks. I pressed a hand to the photograph. "I wish he were here. I wish I could ask him what he'd want me to do." Mom nodded, her expression crumpling. "Me too." For a while, we just sat there, surrounded by the evidence of the life we'd shared. Later that afternoon, I called Michael. My voice shook so badly, I almost hung up before he picked up. "Hi, I managed." "Emily," he breathed. "Hi. I don't know what I'm supposed to say to you," I admitted. "There's nothing you have to say," he replied gently. I'm glad you called." We agreed to meet for coffee the next day. As soon as I ended the call, a strange calm settled over me. Like the first real step toward something new had finally been taken. When I walked into the cafe the following morning, I spotted Michael immediately. He stood when he saw me, looking as nervous as I felt. "Thanks for coming," he said. I sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, he began to tell me about himself, his childhood, his years working in construction, how he'd fallen in love with my mother when they were barely out of high school. He described the day she told him she was marrying someone else. How he'd tried to move on. How he never really could. Listening to him, I started to see the whole messy, imperfect picture. These weren't people who had set out to hurt each other. They were just human beings, trying to make sense of love and obligation and regret. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. "Anything." "If the test had gone the other way, if I wasn't yours, what would you have done?" He looked at me steadily. "I would have accepted it. And I would have still hoped you'd let me know you, even just as a friend." I believed him. In that moment, I realized that whatever happened next was up to me. I could keep running from this, or I could decide that the truth, no matter how complicated, was better than a beautiful lie. When I got home, Mom was waiting on the porch. She stood when I pulled in, her arms folded like she was bracing for another blow. "I met with him," I said. She nodded slowly. "How was it?" "It was good," I admitted. "Hard, but good." She took a hesitant step closer. "Do you hate me?" "No," I whispered. "But I think it's going to take time before I know how to feel." She let out a shaky breath. "I'll wait as long as you need." That evening, I sat alone in my room and picked up the second diary, the one she'd written for me. I read until dawn, through stories I'd never heard and confessions I'd never imagined. In those pages, I saw not just the mother I'd known but the girl she'd once been. The girl who'd loved recklessly, who'd made mistakes, who'd carried the cost of her choices for decades. By the time the sun rose, something inside me had begun to loosen. I realized that maybe family isn't just about biology. It's about the people who stand beside you in the wreckage. The ones who try, even when they fail. A week later, I went with Michael to visit my father's grave. It felt strange and right at the same time. Michael stood back, giving me space. I knelt by the headstone, tracing the letters of my father's name. "I don't know if you knew," I whispered, "but I hope you'd understand. I hope you'd still be proud of me." The breeze stirred through the trees, cool against my skin. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. When I stood, I felt lighter. Not healed, not yet, but closer to something like peace. At home that night, I set both diaries side by side on my dresser. They were proof that even the people we think we know best can carry entire worlds inside them. I didn't have all the answers. I probably never would. But for the first time, that didn't feel like failure. It felt like possibility. Because the truth, messy and beautiful and devastating, had finally found its way out. And I was still here,